Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 31 of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, things had taken a rather dark turn. Marco had been killed by Scar, and Envy is none too happy about this. That constitutes a prominent sacrifice being lost to them. It is sort of nice, in a weird sort of way, how Hawkeye and Edward had this talk. I mean, obviously they weren't talking about good things, but, Hawkeye's always been kind of distant to everyone except Mustang, and that she's sort of getting along with other people's kind of nice. It's not like she ever really needed to, but I feel like considering that everybody here is under the thumb of Wrath, they would do well to stick together. I do find it interesting that this is sort of like the Elric brothers learning about a major historical event in real time, especially considering that the war was somewhat recent and pretty important. You would think, if nothing else, being state alchemists and state alchemist adjacent, they would at least know a little bit about it. I can grant that people like Mustang aren't exactly proud about what they did, so they wouldn't be proclaiming themselves to be heroes, but I feel like, if anyone, maybe Armstrong, out of his shame, would be willing to decry what had happened. But I suppose that might be taken as sedition or insubordination or something like that. So this is another interesting little development that Ed has caught on to. When he was prevented from using alchemy, so were other alchemists. And, even though they were prevented from doing anything, Scar and Mei Chang weren't, so, there has to be some other bit of information that they can use, whether it's to get their bodies back or to fight the homunculi. There is useful information out there that can help. And if nothing else, that's a little bit of hope, and sometimes that little bit of hope is all you need to keep on going. So now we touch on Havoc again after a couple episodes. They've sort of just given him some free weights. The idea being, while you're sitting here idle, you could at least sort of like maintain some degree of your physique. It's not particularly sensitive to his condition, but at the same time, just pitying him wouldn't do him any good either, He doesn't exactly need a kick in the pants, but, a little bit of a push, I feel, is not misplaced. There really is this air of desperation because Mustang's team is essentially being broken up and spread out across the whole of Amestris. Everyone's sort of resolute, but at the same time, I feel like most of them don't grasp the true weight of the situation here. Only Mustang and Hawkeye really know what's going on. They're talking in very plain language, but they are definitely saying more than their words suggest. It just seems like the way, Hawkeye said, "Don't get yourself killed," and he immediately sort of like stopped writing. I don't know, I think that's a very human thing to add to animation, the sort of way he responded to an otherwise innocuous statement. And I'd imagine this period in which they're all sort of separated is going to be rough on everyone. I do find it interesting that Mustang sort of thinks of his subordinates as chess pieces. I wouldn't exactly call them analogous to all the various pieces, but referring to Hawkeye as the queen, I'd say is a pretty fair statement. How clever, he's managed to spread a little message through the chessboard. So Mustang's right, he isn't in checkmate just yet, even though things are pretty grim. So fortunately for the Elric brothers, Mustang is willing to help out on trying to get information about alchemy and all that. I mean, without his support staff, I kind of have to wonder if Mustang is really as shrewd and as effective as he would otherwise be. I mean, obviously he's going to be hampered in some way. I mean, in all likelihood, that was Rat's goal, just to sort of like hamstring him, because, getting rid of him altogether might be a bit too suspicious. But if you just sort of neutralize him, you don't have to worry too much. That's an oddly guarded conversation they just had. About Ed saying you would continuously borrow more money, and Mustang says, you're not going to let me off the hook, are you? And he said, I'll pay you back when this country's a democracy. It seems to me that Ed is sort of, in the nicest way possible, sort of holding him responsible for Ishval. I mean, I guess it's kind of understandable in a way, but you know him personally, he's not a monster. I just noticed something. Mustang has, the faint little outline of, the alchemical symbols he carved into his hand. That's a neat little thing that I didn't notice before, because when he killed Lust, he did in fact, carve the alchemical circle into his hand, and, it's healing, but it's not entirely gone away yet. So I feel like Fu's being a little bit harsh here, I mean, I can understand being a bit upset about your clansman hacking off your own arm, but, well, maybe you just didn't truly grasp the magnitude of the situation. I mean, I'd imagine he's pretty used to carnage and stuff like that, but at the same time, he's not used to his own kindred suffering like that, to this degree, I'd imagine. At least not while still living. So ultimately, Fu and Lanfan are still honorable. Their major concern about finding an automal engineer is that if they were to get the Elric brothers to help them, they would implicate the engineer and thus put them in danger, and that's not something they're willing to do. So obviously they're going to have to use slightly more clandestine methods. It really does seem like things are in a bad way here, but there is that little bit of hope. Mustang got a message through to that elderly general. Lanfan is going to get a prosthetic arm. The Elric brothers have learned about alchemy and how it can potentially work, both to help against the homunculi and potentially to even get their bodies back. Despite how bad things are, there's that little bit of hope that's crucial to just keep on going. And I think even for the Doctor, there's a little bit of hope. It's pretty clear he's seen and done some horrible things. I would have to imagine that taking care of people who are grateful is probably affecting him more than he would let on. Alright, so what precipitated this event, I wonder? It seems like his estranged family just sort of showing up, apropos of nothing. I mean, it's weird in a way, Despite being estranged, they seem to be on surprisingly good terms. I almost have to wonder if they were estranged to them both being too stubborn, and that the problems that sort of caused this rift were really much smaller than either of them had imagined. I mean, his son's even, telling him to his face, "I want to be a doctor like you." It almost seems like a little bit of a coincidence. I feel like something had to have precipitated this. Someone perhaps meddling a little bit. So this is interesting, we're sort of looking at Kimberly a little bit more. It seems that the reason he might be imprisoned is because he decided to keep the stone against orders and killed anyone who knew he had it. I guess that's pretty good reason to imprison him, as if war crimes weren't a good enough reason. And worse yet, he still has the stone, albeit he's in prison and he can't clap his hands together as he normally would. Alright, so now the plot's getting really thick. He is, in fact, being released. So I feel like if he's being released, the homunculi are behind this, They've furnished him with a suit, and he's being released from what was presumably a life sentence. The worst part about all of this is that he's insufferably smug, Perhaps I deserve to go free, he says. Oh dear. I feel like that's a bad omen, shaking somebody's hand left-handed. But, it turns out to be pretty well founded. Kimberly just sort of transmuted a little bomb onto his wrist. Now, that bomb was a toy, but I feel like, there might be a double fake out or something. I don't trust Kimberly, and frankly, I don't think anyone should. I mean, I guess given that he's just being released from prison, he's not too keen on immediately getting tossed back in with good cause. So, like clockwork, it was in fact the homunculi who got him released, and they've done so because they want his help. Alright, so in all likelihood, Dr. Marco is not dead. Or at least Envy seems to think he's still alive. And he's sort of pulled a fast one with the help of Scar, as it were. So this sets up an interesting dynamic. Kimberly and Scar have a personal connection here. If Scar is going to be personally hunted down by Kimberly because of his association with Dr. Marco, I feel like this is setting up a rather interesting conflict here. If Scar's unwilling to kill Marco, he must have a good reason for it. He wants him to atone. So I feel like there's going to be some conflict here whereby Scar's going to have to make a choice. Sort of choosing between what is expedient and what is in accordance with his morals. And I feel like Kimblee's going to force that decision in a way that's ultimately not beneficial to everyone. So here's something interesting. Scar is, as of yet, unwilling to kill Dr. Marco, if only because he has not yet told him the full history of what had happened. And since Dr. Marco is really the only one who knows anything in any complete sense, killing him would cause the information to be lost permanently. And at least right now, that's not something he's willing to have happen. Man, I feel really bad for Dr. Marco in a sense, Everybody wants to know how to craft the Philosopher's Stone, but, they seem to approach the idea without even the possibility of considering that it might be an absolutely horrific thing to create. So, Scar's obviously done this for pragmatic reasons, maiming Dr. Marco, but I feel like, maybe he could have been a little bit more delicate about it. I can see why he wouldn't want to be, but, causing needless suffering doesn't seem like it's going to make anything better in the long run. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.